Denver Broncos inside linebacker Drew Sanders is set to miss an indefinite amount of time after tearing his Achilles. Why might this be a blow to the Broncos' young developmental core? And are there any solutions that they have on deck? We'll break that down and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country once again for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this show for free every single day all year long on YouTube or available everywhere that you get your podcast. If you listen to us once or twice a week, bump that up to 5 times a week because every single day we bring you fresh Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Obviously, this time of the year, you're always scouring his team's report for OTAs. You start doing on-field workouts. You start hearing about some injuries that do happen. Well, the Broncos didn't necessarily have an injury happen this week, but come to find out, they've lost Drew Sanders for an indefinite amount of time after he suffered an injury when the Broncos first began their offseason program before the NFL draft. Torn Achilles, has had surgery. He's out indefinitely, potentially the whole entire year. Obviously, a big blow when we talk about the Broncos' need for developing a young core of players. Obviously, you're hoping to get the second contracts outside of Marvin Mims. Drew Sanders was Denver's top draft pick in the 2023 NFL draft, and a guy who kind of had a little bit of a positional question mark going into this season. We were hoping we were going to figure out where Drew was going to play this week. That is not going to be the case now as he is out and he is sidelined indefinitely.
Yeah, our good friend Mike Kliss over there at 9 News in Denver, he had reported this injury initially. And from the article that I read of his, Cody, it really sounded like the Broncos were maybe leaning towards playing Drew off the edge. And I don't know, I was kind of sitting here almost hoping like, oh man, maybe they're just saying that, but maybe they really were. I mean, that would be one of the more surprising things to me, is that they were actually planning on keeping him at the edge. If that was the case, I mean, man, that draft pick is looking worse by the day. And of course, you and I both, and hopefully everybody listening, we all want to see Drew Sanders healthy. We want to see him out there playing football, doing what he does best. To me, Cody, maybe the worst part about this is that really nothing changes for the 2024 season for the Broncos. I mean, we hoped that maybe Drew could be a starter at off-ball linebacker, but when we talk about him as an edge player on this roster, you and I both kind of wondered out loud in previous episodes that we've done, like, where is he going to play? Is he going to play ahead of Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito, Baron Browning? Jonah Elliss came in during the NFL draft, and now obviously we know that maybe that was a bit of a response to the Drew Sanders injury, but at the same time, it's like, where was he going to play off the edge? Where was he going to steal snaps from? And who was he going to steal them from? Off-ball linebacker situation was maybe his clearest path to playing time, with Cody Barton coming in and the Broncos re-signing Jonas Griffith and Justin Sternad there. It just felt like there was not necessarily a obvious fit for where Drew was going to play this year, which to me is the most disappointing aspect of this, because now you've got a guy who's bordering on positionless, who's now going to miss potentially an entire season of development after nearly redshirting. I mean, he played mostly special teams last year, right? He played about 100 snaps defensively. So now he's losing another year, and we don't know where he's going to play. That to me is the most concerning thing about this whole situation.
Well, and I think as well, I'll be very curious to know what George Paton, Sean Payton's thought process is on Drew Sanders. And look, sometimes it's going to take a couple of years for a guy to get to where they want to be. Obviously, this injury comes up and it really kind of throws a wrench in those plans, right? Because I think this would have been a huge year for development for Drew. I mean, regardless, he would have had a position, right? We don't know what it is. We don't know what it was going to be, but he was going to have a position this year regardless. And now we're not going to get the opportunity to see where he was going to fit into the mix here. I mean, ideally, once again, like, it's not necessarily his fault. I think the Broncos run on injuries that they had a little bit last year, you saw him switch positions from inside linebacker to outside linebacker, something that we had to keep secret for several weeks after watching it at practice. But then you lose Josie Jewell in the offseason. It's like, all right, now does that open up the door for him to go back to off-ball linebacker because he's athletic, he's smart, he's a guy who can read and diagnose and make plays. Like, he's freshly new, though, to the inside linebacker position, played 1 year of it at Arkansas, did a tremendous job, and then obviously got drafted for that position. And look, it's going to take a little more time, a little bit more development. I'm not necessarily going to give up on Drew quite yet. Like, while I think the circumstances surrounding his roster spot, his position, were very unclear going into this season, I don't think that the Broncos' tone on him has changed. And obviously, if I get a chance to ask Sean Payton as we commence throughout OTAs in the next week or so, where things are at in that regard there. But for Drew, now it's an opportunity for him to continue to learn. Look, you're going to have to get as much mental reps as possible. I do think one of the concerns that you have here is obviously when you're not able to be on the field and get those on-field reps, it hurts. But also I want to go back and reference another guy that is on the Broncos roster. Heck, there's a couple of inside linebackers on Denver's roster right now that have experienced that. Jonas Griffith last year had to sit out an entire season, impacted his development. Justin Sternot a few years ago with the wrist injury had to sit out an entire season. That impacted his development. It's not a death sentence in terms of Drew Sanders' career with the Denver Broncos. It's just an obstacle right now, and I guarantee you we will see him come back. Now, the question is, can he come back in season? With the advancement in Achilles recovery, medical technology, it's certainly possible he can return late in the season. I don't think that's the best case scenario here for Denver, though. I think that regardless, like, you got to be smart with his recovery. And obviously, Bo Lowry and the team's medical staff, they're already doing that. Drew is already receiving treatment at the team facility. He's in good hands. We'll see what the timeline is, but I don't think there's any need to rush him back onto the field this season. You're going to have to let things play out, which is going to obviously impact, I think, the Broncos' rotation at the edge rusher position. And really, I think that's where we're going to dive into next is, what does the rotation look like after Drew Sanders' injury? We don't know how long he's going to be out, whether it's the season. If obviously Denver places him on injury reserve now, then that means that it's going to really end his season entirely, because it is the offseason, if I'm not mistaken. Or I don't know if that's just an offseason thing or if that's just if you do that in training camp, it makes it toward. Do you know that by chance? Do you know if it's just a training camp thing, or if they place him on IR now, does that mean that his season is essentially done for?
For some reason, I thought I had read that they were changing that rule up, but I'd have to confirm that. I thought that because that would be the smartest thing, wouldn't it? It's so dumb that NFL teams have to wait to place guys on IR, subject other guys to waivers, or cut veterans just to sign them the next day. I mean, it's a flawed process. I thought I had read somewhere that it was changing this year, but we'll get confirmation on that. Maybe add it in the comments or something. I don't recall off the top of my head for sure.
All right. Well, Broncos Country, if you know the answer to that, make sure you drop it into Sayre and I here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But how does Sanders' injury impact the rotation at the outside linebacker position? Well, that's something that Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to dive deep into that here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at Yahoo Finance. And when it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that is Yahoo Finance. If you want to learn more about the financial market, things that are going on, Yahoo Finance has been a great tool for me, especially analyzing trends, flows, things like that. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. And whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and the data that you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insights to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com.
The Drew Sanders injury is a blow for the Denver Broncos defense, but it could pave the way for other guys to eat up the Lions' share of snaps and maybe earn their way to a second contract in Denver after this season. Cody and I are going to break down the edge rotation for the Denver Broncos here entering the 2024 offseason program. But I want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's always your team every day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as you can jump over on YouTube. And if you haven't done that yet, man, that's one of my favorite things to do. Is I get in bed at night, Cody, I turn on YouTube. The algorithm's got a bunch of Broncos content set up for me, so we could support our fellow creators in this sphere, but also it gives you an opportunity to catch up on whatever's going on with the Denver Broncos at the beginning or end of your day, whenever you kind of wind down there. So go subscribe at on the YouTube page there. Let's break down this edge position group, though, for the Denver Broncos, because if Drew Sanders was truly playing off the edge this coming season, and by all indications, that was not only realistic, it might have been planned. Now the snaps are opened up for the rest of the guys at this group, which is a young position. I mean, Cody, it's such a young position group that I almost wonder, do the Broncos need to go out and get a veteran for this group? Let's talk about the guys, though, first, who are on the roster here and this edge position that really it's not going to change a whole lot between last year and this year.
No, it wasn't. And I think ideally, if Drew Sanders was healthy and was playing at outside linebacker, I think our bigger question was, okay, how does the rotation now work? Because your top three pass rushers on this team, your starters, as we anticipate and project, are going to be Baron Browning and Jonathan Cooper, two guys who are also in contract years here. And then after that, it's going to be Nik Bonitto, who took such a massive step forward for the organization, really was probably the biggest surprise player, came out of nowhere in terms of where he was at his rookie season, a big transformation into his second season. He and Jonathan Cooper, I mean, they were the top two sack producers here for the Broncos defense last year. Baron Browning had 4.5 last year after only playing in 10 games. He missed a good portion of the first half of the season with the knee injury that required the Broncos to make some moves in the offseason last year at the outside linebacker position. But then now you add in Jonah Elliss into the mix. Ideally, last year, how it was when Drew Sanders was healthy and he was playing there, it was Barron, it was Jonathan Cooper, and then it was Bonitto and Drew Sanders coming in that rush package there. Well, now I think because of Sanders' injury and it removes him from the equation, well, now Jonah Elliss is thrust into a very, very important position early on here where we anticipate, okay, if Barron and Jonathan Cooper are going to be starting for Denver on the outside, well, that means when the rush package comes in, you're going to see Nik Bonitto. You're also going to see Jonah Elliss early on here. And part of me is wondering here too, like, is this the top four depth? I think right now, because of the injury, this is the Broncos' top four depth. I think Drew Sanders, if healthy, has still a lot of potential to him, has played outside linebacker before, dating back to his time at Alabama. But you know how that program is. You know how the SEC is in terms of churning out guys. He made the positional switch, and then obviously it paid off. I think for Jonah Elliss, you look at the explosiveness, you look at the high motor, you look at the edge discipline, and you look at his body of work at Utah. Okay, the expectations, I think, for him now, because of this injury, become a little bit higher. Now, granted, Sanders' injury happened before the NFL draft, which I think is a great indicator, Sayre, if anything, if Broncos Country's listening or watching and they're trying to figure out what's going on, it goes to show how tight of an operation things are being run over there in Dove Valley. The fact that this information didn't get out before the NFL draft is astounding. So shout out to Mike Kliss, getting us the news here a little bit in May, well after the fact there, after he's already had surgery and he's in the recovery process. But I think the rotation doesn't change really at all for the Broncos. And maybe part of me does wonder here, I mean, is there going to be a competition to see who starts at outside linebacker? I don't know. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Bonitto's got a great case, but he did excel coming off the bench a little bit here for the Broncos as that 12th man there. So, I mean, it's hard to argue against that. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But can Denver get better overall? I think part of the edge rush, productivity, as we talked about, is also contingent upon the defensive line.
Yeah, they need to make sure that they have different personnel packages. We talked about that with the wide receiver position before, and now I think the same thing applies to the entire pass rush package, whether it's different combinations off the edge, whether it's aligning guys on the defensive line somewhere, because we've seen that before from different players. I think that there's just creative ways that the Broncos can attack the opposing quarterback, and they've got to utilize that athleticism. They've got to utilize these guys. I mean, you don't want any one of Browning, Bonito, or Jonathan Cooper to be rotting on the bench by any means. Certainly not your rookie Jonah Elliss either, who, I mean, you prioritized him. That's the same story with Drew Sanders, and kind of what makes this whole ordeal frustrating is that even if Drew was going to play this year, it's like, where is he going to play? When is he going to play? How much is he going to play? I mean, you want to see your higher draft picks actually out there on the field. And so that's where I think the Broncos, you want to bring pass rush in waves. You want your best players to play. So you've got to figure out ways to get these guys on the field. And it's a good problem to have. Now, where the Broncos are really set back right now is the fact that they whiffed on the Randy Gregory signing, because as of right now, we're still waiting to see who can develop into that premier player off the edge. And we hope that it can be any one of those top 3 guys, or maybe even Jonah Elliss at some point. But when you signed Randy Gregory to the free agent contract, you expected him to come in and be that steady force off the edge every single week. And he just never was that. And so the Broncos trade him to the 49ers last year. I don't even know where he's playing this year, Cody. I saw that he signed somewhere, but I can't remember where it was.
Isn't it Miami? I feel like he's in Miami.
It could be. Yeah. Somebody let us know in the comments if it's not Miami somewhere. But at any rate, he's no longer in Denver, and neither is Bradley Chubb, neither is Von Miller. I mean, those players are long gone at this point. And so
Tampa Bay,
there we go. That makes sense. A Florida team. So, and look, like, this begs the question now as to whether or not the Broncos need to raise the floor at this position, because Baron Browning has dealt with injuries, and Jonathan Cooper at times has dealt with injuries. You have a rookie in Jonah Elliss who came into the NFL with the shoulder injury, right? And so there's so much here that's like, man, the potential and the promise is very good. There's a lot of athleticism. There's a lot of hustle. There's guys that can get after the quarterback with a variety of different moves, but is the floor too low amongst this group right now? That's what I wonder. And not that Drew Sanders necessarily changed that so much, but maybe that injury causes you to kind of reevaluate, as opposed to the "it takes a village" mentality. Maybe now the Broncos are going to need to go into the free agent pool and say, hey, I mean, if this guy can come in and at least give us a floor raiser in training camp, because is it going to be Thomas Incoom who does that? Is it going to be Ronnie Perkins? I don't know. I just don't think that's necessarily the wise course of action. So to me, Cody, I'd be looking for a floor raiser and let these young guys have the first crack.
Well, they're also going to need someone that's going to come in and play special teams, to be honest with you, because that's where Drew played in 17 games last year, and he contributed primarily, emerged as a core 4 special teams player for Ben Kotwika and Mike Westhoff. So you're going to have to find a way to replace that. I think he was playing really well. Obviously, came up with a big fumble recovery against the Kansas City Chiefs and the Broncos' victory against Kansas City last season. But, you mentioned the guys like the Thomas Incooms, even looking at Ronnie Perkins, who's still on this team as well. How does that vision change? Are these guys playable at not only just outside linebacker, but also defensive end? Like we talk about widespread depth overall in terms of getting after the quarterback. You have to factor it in. But I will say this, in hindsight, looking at the Randy Gregory signing, you can also make the argument, look at what happened with Von Miller. Look what happened with Chandler Jones, for example. Those are the 3 pass rushers that the Broncos had interest in. None of them worked out really for the situation or the teams that they ended up going on. And even Von Miller, like even though that Von restructured his contract, that has been a massive fail in Buffalo so far, so to speak. So, I mean, maybe it washes itself out in comparison. I don't know. But overall, Denver's going to have to find a way to maybe build and add to this roster a little bit. Could it be the Thomas Incooms? Could be the Ronnie Perkins? Maybe not. We'll have to continue to see here. Or could the Broncos potentially look at some of the free agent options that are still out there and still available that could maybe rush the passer? We'll take a look at who those players could be on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. As we jump to the 4th quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll take a look at some free agent names the Broncos could maybe look to bring in during training camp or OTAs after the news of Drew Sanders suffering a torn Achilles prior to the NFL draft. Do the Broncos need to build onto the depth of that position room with the injury, or are they comfortable with running it kind of how it is right now? Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked On Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you so much. Make sure you subscribe or follow if you have not done so already. Do the Broncos need to add anybody in free agency? Usually around this time, the market starts to dwindle out a little bit, right? Right before training camp. We're still a couple months away from that. But overall, I mean, Denver's at a point right now, they have to evaluate the decisions that they're going to make as it pertains to this outside linebacker group. Is it going to be a four-man rotation? Who's going to be the fifth guy between maybe Ronnie Perkins and Thomas Incoom, who was, in the mix last year for the Broncos? Or are they going to look to bring in a veteran guy? I mean, at this point, Sayre, I don't necessarily think that the Broncos need to bring in a veteran option at this point, because the reality of the situation is the Broncos, Sean Payton, they like Jonathan Cooper. They like Baron Browning and Nick Bonito as their top three young edge rushers. Obviously, they like Jonah Elliss. So if you like that room, I mean, you can maybe add a guy that can give you depth on the back end if you need it, but the realistic scenario is that guy's probably not, if you do bring in a veteran, that guy's probably not going to get a lot of playing time. Is going to probably have to play a lot on special teams. Is there anybody out there, in your opinion, you think would be okay with that type of role, taking the backseat to three other pass rushers? I don't know if there's going to be a situation that warrants it here for the Broncos.
Yeah, you'd really have to find somebody that's out there who's, a complete opposite, I guess, to maybe what Frank Clark was last year. Remember when the Broncos brought him in after the Baron Browning injury? I think Frank kind of expected to just be handed a starting role. And then remember, he was playing deep into the fourth quarter of preseason games along with Randy Gregory. And those two guys ended up, getting out of there. So I think that it has to be kind of the opposite type of guy. Now, what I've heard about somebody like Marcus Golden, who's a free agent, who's played for Vance Joseph in the past. I've heard that Marcus Golden is like the quintessential teammate. Like, he is the ultimate teammate, great veteran leadership, willing to play whatever role. So maybe he could fit something like that. A guy that, like, when I look at the available free agents, Cody, and I see like, okay, that might be worth a little dart throw there. Somebody like Carl Lawson. Remember when he was balling out for the Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Jets? And his first 5 NFL seasons, he had 107 quarterback hits. I mean, you're averaging 26, 27 quarterback hits a season at that point. I know he struggled with injuries and things like that and didn't play much last year, but that could be a dart throw. That would be interesting. If the Broncos are looking to add, like I said, that floor raiser veteran off the edge. I mean, Marcus Golden, as good of a leader as he is, has also been very productive as a pass rusher. And I saw a lot of Steelers fans where he recently played. A lot of Steelers fans are hoping that he would come back because he was so good for that room. So, I mean, there's guys out there, right? But the question to me is, when you talk about players who are available, like, are the Broncos looking for depth at edge? Are they looking at it at inside linebacker, or somebody who could do both? Or, like you said, Cody, are they looking more for a special teams guy? Like, that really will change the whole discussion entirely.
Well, in my opinion, if you're looking for a guy who can play on special teams, then use one of the young guys you have on the roster. Use one of your developmental talents and see if they can go out there and earn more playing time and maybe get into the defensive rotation because of how they're playing on special teams. Really, in today's NFL, you see it based on special teams productivity and also when injuries happen, where you see a guy who's developing get a chance to get more involved in the rotation. I mean, historically, we've seen that with guys like Wesley Woodyard. We've seen it with guys like David Bruton. We've seen it more recently. I'd probably say another guy like Kayvon Webster was a guy who also did that. I'm trying to think of a more recent name there, but ideally, like, you get the point I'm trying to make here. Guys who have played a ton of special teams and they produce there at a high level, they get more confidence. They maybe get more ingrained with being in the defensive meetings as well. And then when their number is called due to injury, or like, hey, coach is like, this guy's put in a lot of work, let's see what he can do at his position on offense or defense. Then you get to see a little bit of visualization as to what they can become. And look, the preseason can give you somewhat of a look. I don't think can give you a realistic enough look, considering how many guys you have to try to play to get looks at. You want to see game film. You want to see game tape versus some of the other stuff that gets put out there. And then at the same time, you run into the issue where the NFL also transitioning here soon, where they're looking to try to eliminate one preseason game to where you're only going to get 2. So how do you maximize player development versus going out there and outsourcing and trying to get a guy to come in that's going to have to learn your schemes, going to have to learn your team philosophy, your locker room culture? Can they fit into that? Like, there's so many external questions that come in outside of just being a football player that really make, I think, the Broncos situation right now probably not as worthy of investing in the outside market, in my opinion, at least. But I mean, yeah, you could go with a guy if a guy like Marcus Golden is willing to come in and say, you know what, I know my place here is not going to be heavily involved in the rotation. I'm going to be here. I'm going to play special teams. And if there's an injury, I'm going to step up and I'm going to play and contribute and give you what I've proven to give you. There's that. There's also a couple of other names out there that can play some off-ball linebacker, like, for example, Quan Alexander, Shaq Leonard. Those guys are available. As it pertains to outside linebacker, I don't necessarily think those guys would maybe fit the bill for what the Broncos are looking for. And to be honest with you, guys of that stature with that experience, I don't think they're going to take a back seat either to, 3 other guys in front of them. So that's where I think the Broncos options right now are limited. The best bet, in my opinion, Sayre, roll with what you have and see what you have there.
Yeah, and maybe it opens the door for an undrafted player. Like we're talking about the off-ball linebacker position. How about somebody like Lavelle Bailey? I've heard a lot of good things about him out of Fresno State. Want to go watch a little bit more of him. So yeah, if the off-ball linebacker special teams ability is something that really the door is open now, because everybody's getting bumped up a notch on the depth chart, whether it's special teams or off the edge or at off-ball linebacker. And there's no doubt the Broncos wanted to get obviously they held on to this news for a while now, but you want to get ahead of it because everybody's going to see fairly soon at OTAs, like, hey, Drew Sanders isn't out there. What's going on? It does change quite a bit in terms of just the ripple effect from special teams to defense and at both of the first 2 levels of the defense. And so I'll be fascinated to see if there is a response signing to this, but then we're also at a very delicate time here because it's May 21 and we know that the June 1 deadline is where things cross over from, hey, the veteran salaries before June 1, they're guaranteed. And after June 1, they're not guaranteed. So you could see a lot of veterans will be pushing to get those deals signed here before June 1st, whereas teams are going to be like, no, let's wait until at this point. So you want to just approach with caution at this point. You don't need to, obviously they're not making any knee-jerk reaction moves. They haven't done that. They've waited a month to even let this news out. So I think it's clear the Broncos are confident at this point, whatever the plan is.
Well, Broncos Country, we want to hear from you. What does the loss of Drew Sanders have on the Broncos in terms of young developmental talent? What role did you see him playing this upcoming season? If you're listening or watching Locked On Broncos on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, make sure that you let us know. OTAs continue, and really we're going to focus on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos, the cornerback position. Patrick Surtain in line for a mega contract this season, potentially going into this offseason. And then there's also questions about the cornerback job. Who's going to come under the microscope during OTAs? We'll break that down and much more in tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.